Welcome back to Crime Time Inc. Okay, so you wanted to know more about the Castle Hill Rebellion, or as it's sometimes called Australia's Vinegar Hill.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of charming, but trust me, this is a story about an attempted overthrow of the government, a story full of ambition, desperation, and ultimately tragedy.
That's right. And to really grasp the gravity of this event, you have to understand the historical context. We're talking about 1804. Australia was a British penal colony, and a lot of the convicts sent there were Irish rebels who had fought against British rule back home. They brought that fight with them across the ocean.
So these weren't just common criminals, they were political prisoners with military experience driven by a powerful ideology.
Precisely. These were veterans of the 1798 Irish Rebellion people who had experienced firsthand the brutality of British suppression and yearned for an Irish republic. They hadn't given up on that dream, even in the harsh reality of a penal colony.
And I imagine news from Ireland about Robert Emmet's failed uprising in 1803 fueled their discontent even further.
Absolutely. It would have been a stark reminder that the struggle for Irish independence was still raging and that their comrades were still fighting and dying for the cause.
So they were thousands of miles away, but their hearts and minds were still very much tied to the fight back in Ireland.
Exactly. And that sense of connection is crucial to understanding why they were willing to risk everything in this rebellion. It wasn't just about escaping their confinement. It was about striking a blow against British rule wherever they could.
It's fascinating how, even in this far-flung corner of the world, the political turmoil of Europe was playing out.
The world felt a lot smaller back then, in a way. News traveled slowly, but when it did, it had a profound impact on events. This rebellion is a prime example of that.
So let's talk about the rebellion itself. How did this simmering discontent boil over into an actual uprising?
Well, it began on the night of March 4th, 1804, with a signal fire at a hut in Castle Hill. It was a call to arms, a beacon of rebellion that ignited the hopes of those who had been waiting for this moment.
A signal fire. Talking about a dramatic start.
It was a deliberate and powerful symbol, one that harkened back to ancient traditions of rebellion and resistance.
And what happened next?
Roughly 300 convicts, many armed with makeshift weapons, stormed the government farm at Castle Hill. They overpowered the guards, seized weapons and supplies, and declared their intention to march on Parramatta, a key settlement at the time. They even declared their leader Philip Cunningham as king of the Australian Empire and referred to the area as New Ireland.
Philip Cunningham, he was a key figure, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He was a veteran of the 1798 rebellion, a natural leader who commanded respect among the convicts. He embodied their hopes for a free Ireland, and his charisma played a large part in rallying them to this daring cause.
So it wasn't just a chaotic outburst. This was a planned and coordinated uprising with a clear objective.
Yes, they intended to seize control of the colony, establish their own independent republic, and eventually secure passage back to Ireland to continue the fight there.
It's incredible to think about the level of organization and planning that must have gone into this, given their circumstances.
They were operating under incredibly difficult conditions, constantly watched by authorities, and with limited means of communication. Yet they managed to forge a network of support, spread the word, and coordinate their actions. It speaks to their determination and their belief in their cause.
So they had their leader, their plan, and their objective. But what about the authorities? How did they react to this sudden eruption of rebellion?
Well, as you can imagine, panic gripped the colony. News of the uprising spread like wildfire, and prominent figures like Samuel Marsden feared for their lives and fled by boat. Governor King wasted no time in declaring martial law, effectively giving the military absolute power to quell the rebellion.
So the authorities weren't taking any chances. They recognized the serious threat this posed to their control.
Absolutely. They knew they had to act swiftly and decisively to crush this rebellion before it gained any more momentum.
And that's where Major George Johnston enters the picture, right?
Precisely. He was a British military officer tasked with leading the government forces against the rebels. He was experienced and ruthless, and he had a clear mandate to restore order by any means necessary.
It sounds like the stage was set for a violent confrontation.
It was. And both sides were prepared to fight for what they believed in.
So let's talk about that confrontation. What happened when the rebels and the government forces finally clashed?
Well, the decisive clash took place the following day, March 5th, at a place called Rouse Hill. The convicts, armed with whatever they could find, faced off against the organized and better-equipped government forces.
So it was a classic David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
A ragtag group of rebels against the might of the British military.
In a way, yes. But you have to remember, these rebels weren't just desperate farmers. They were seasoned fighters, many of whom had battled British troops in Ireland. They weren't going to back down easily.
And they had something else fighting on their side, didn't they? A burning desire for freedom.
Absolutely. As they confronted Major Johnston, they issued a desperate plea, death or liberty and a ship to take us home. It speaks volumes about their unwavering commitment to their ideals. Even facing overwhelming odds, they clung to the hope of a free Ireland.
That's a really powerful image. It shows the depth of their conviction and the desperation of their situation.
It does. And it underscores the fact that this wasn't just about escaping their current predicament. It was about a much larger struggle, a fight for self-determination that had been passed down through generations.
So how did the battle itself unfold? Was it a bloody, drawn-out affair or a quick and decisive clash?
Well, unfortunately for the rebels, it was the latter. Major Johnston, a shrewd tactician, employed a cunning strategy that quickly turned the tide of the battle.
What did he do?
He and Trooper Thomas Anlazark approached the rebel leaders under a flag of truce, pretending to negotiate a peaceful resolution.
A flag of truce? That seems a bit underhanded, doesn't it?
It was a risky maneuver, but it was also incredibly effective. It played on the rebels' hope for a peaceful outcome and allowed Johnston and Anlazark to get close enough to strike.
So what happened next?
When they were within striking distance, they suddenly drew hidden pistols and captured the rebel leaders completely by surprise. It was a bold move that completely demoralized the rebel forces.
That must have been a devastating blow to the rebels, to have their leaders captured in such a manner.
It was. It effectively broke the back of the rebellion. Without their leadership, the remaining convicts were quickly rounded up and the uprising was swiftly crushed.
It's a tragic end to a story that began with so much hope and determination.
It is. And the aftermath of the rebellion was even more brutal. The 9 captured leaders, including Philip Cunningham, were swiftly executed without trial.
Executed without trial. That seems incredibly harsh, even for the standards of the time.
It was a display of raw power, a way for the authorities to make an example of the rebels and deter any future uprisings. They wanted to send a clear message that any challenge to British rule would be met with swift and merciless retribution.
So the rebellion was crushed and its leaders were executed. But what about the rest of the rebels? What happened to them?
They faced a range of punishments. Some were flogged, some were exiled to the notoriously harsh Coal River chain gang, and others were sent to work in the equally brutal coal mines at Newcastle.
So even if they weren't executed, their lives were still drastically altered by their involvement in the rebellion.
Absolutely. The punishments were designed to be both physically and psychologically damaging, a constant reminder of the price of defiance.
It's a grim reminder of the brutal realities of colonial life and the lengths to which the authorities would go to maintain control.
It is. But despite the harsh consequences, the Castle Hill Rebellion wasn't entirely in vain.
What do you mean? How can you say that, given the brutal suppression of the rebellion and the suffering of those involved?
Well, on a practical level, the rebellion obviously failed to achieve its immediate goals. It didn't liberate the convicts, it didn't establish an Irish Republic in Australia, and it didn't secure passage back to Ireland.
That's true. But you're suggesting there's more to the story than just the immediate outcome.
Exactly. You see, the Castle Hill Rebellion became something much larger than itself. It became a symbol, a powerful reminder that even in the most oppressive of circumstances, the human spirit yearns for freedom and will fight for it even against insurmountable odds.
So you're saying it was more about the message it sent than the actual outcome?
Precisely. The Castle Hill Rebellion became a rallying cry for future generations of Australians who sought to challenge authority and fight for their rights. It became a touchstone, a reminder that resistance is always possible, even in the face of overwhelming power.
That's an interesting perspective. It reframes the rebellion not as a failure, but as a spark that ignited a much larger movement for social justice and equality.
And that spark resonated particularly strongly among the Irish community in Australia. The memory of Vinegar Hill, the site of a crushing defeat for Irish rebels in 1798, took on a new meaning in Australia. It became a symbol of defiance, a reminder of their shared heritage and their ongoing struggle for freedom.
So the name Vinegar Hill became a powerful symbol in Australia, representing not just the Castle Hill Rebellion, but a much broader struggle for liberty and self-determination.
Exactly. And that symbolism would play a significant role in future uprisings and protests. It would serve as a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before, a rallying cry for those who sought to create a more just and equitable society.
You mentioned future uprisings. What are some specific examples of how the legacy of the Castle Hill Rebellion lived on in Australian history?
Well, one of the most notable examples is the Eureka Stockade, a rebellion by gold miners in 1854 who were protesting against unfair mining licenses. The miners, many of whom were Irish Australians, used the password Vinegar Hill as a way to honor the memory of the Castle Hill rebels and to signal their shared commitment to the fight for freedom.
So even though it took place over 50 years later, the Eureka Stockade was directly inspired by the events of the Castle Hill Rebellion.
It was. And the use of the password Vinegar Hill is a powerful testament to the enduring legacy of that earlier uprising. It shows how a single act of rebellion, however unsuccessful in the short term, can have a ripple effect across generations, inspiring others to fight for a better world.
It's amazing to think about how these seemingly isolated events were actually connected across time by a shared thread of resistance and a desire for change.
And it's not just about specific events. The Castle Hill Rebellion also had a broader impact on Australian culture and identity. It helped to shape a national narrative of rebellion and resistance, a spirit of defiance that continues to resonate today.
So you're saying it became part of the Australian psyche, a sort of cultural touchstone that informs how Australians view themselves and their relationship with authority.
In a way, yes. It's a reminder that Australians have a long history of standing up to injustice and fighting for what they believe in, even when the odds are stacked against them.
It's a powerful legacy, and it speaks to the enduring human spirit, the desire for freedom and autonomy that transcends time and place.
And it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. The hope that even the smallest act of rebellion can spark a chain reaction leading to positive change.
It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing tapestry woven from the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us.
And it's a tapestry that continues to be woven today. The fight for justice and equality is an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance and a willingness to stand up for what's right.
So what can we learn from the Castle Hill Rebellion all these years later? What lessons does it hold for us today?
I think one of the most important lessons is that the fight for freedom and justice is never truly over. It's an ongoing struggle, one that requires constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
So it's not enough to simply learn about these events. We have to actively engage with their legacy and apply their lessons to the challenges we face today.
Absolutely. We need to remember that power is never static. It's constantly being negotiated and contested, and it's up to each generation to defend and expand the boundaries of freedom and justice.
And we also need to remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It's often a slow and arduous process full of setbacks and disappointments.
That's true. But it's important to never lose sight of the bigger picture. The fight for a better world is a marathon, not a sprint. And even small victories can pave the way for larger ones down the road.
So the Castle Hill Rebellion wasn't just about a group of convicts trying to escape their confinement. It was about something much larger, a struggle for human dignity and self-determination that continues to resonate today.
And it's a struggle that each of us has a role to play in, whether it's through our words, our actions, or our simple refusal to accept injustice.
It's a powerful message. And it's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit can prevail.
And it's a reminder that history is never truly finished. It's a conversation that continues across generations. It's up to us to ensure that the voices of those who fought for a better world are never forgotten.
If someone can drag Simon out of the bar, maybe he can visit one of the Castle Hill Rebellion sites and report back to us in the Sunday Review. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.